cement floor, which I think was an advantage because you learn to fall the right way real quick.
Yeah, and if you could bump there, you could bump anywhere, right?
Absolutely. And then I hurt my ankle once, and I was out for, I don't know, about 4 or 5 months, and then came back. And in the meantime, across town in Columbus, Ted Oates had rented a storefront downtown and actually had a ring in there. So that was my first involvement with a ring. So I started retraining again, and now in the ring, I already knew how the bumps and a lot of the basics in that, and we just moved on from there and had a students match in the police athletic league there. We did a benefit, and that was my first match, and it was great. And then I didn't do anything for a while, and was always a big fan. Used to go to Columbus Auditorium and see the TV tapings down there all the time. And one of the guys I trained with was putting up the ring, and I said, "Bill, what are you doing?" He says, "Well, they rent my ring now when they come to town." And he said, "Are you working?" And I said, "No, I haven't wrestled. I really didn't care to." And he said, "Well, why don't you come up with me? I'm wrestling this little bar up in North Georgia, and bring your stuff." And I said, "Well, I don't want to bring my stuff, but I'd like to come up and watch you." So I went up with him a couple of times, rode up, and then I took my stuff. And long story short, one of the guys didn't show up, and the promoter says, "You want to work?" And I said, "Well, sure." I only had one match on my belt, and that was a squash. So I went and wrestled this guy named The Animal, and I was wrestling as Randy Franklin at the time. And he said, "Can you come back next week?" I said, "Sure." So I went back, and he said, "You look a little bit like that Hulk Hogan. So we're going to call you Hal Hogan." And I said, "Well, I don't know about the Hal thing. How about Randy?" And he says, "Okay, you're going to be Randy Hogan. You're going to be his cousin." So whatever you want me to be. So I went home all thrilled.
Like the Anderson family, they're all cousins or brothers or something.
Yeah. So I went home, bleached my hair blonde, and came back, and that's how it started. Then, going to see all the guys I wrestled with at other matches at different places. They had a match that I was on, and I was doing pretty well at the time, just a little independent stuff. Instead of a payoff of a hot dog and a Coke, I got a hot dog, a Coke, and an ice cream. So I was doing pretty well. And then, and this Action Mike Jackson was on the card. Now, he was a self-proclaimed Alabama junior heavyweight champion for about 40 years. He's still working out there. But so we got talking to that, and I said, "Mike, how do you get on TV?" Because he was on TV all the time. And he said, "Well, I bring guys up once in a while." He says, "So why don't you just ride up with me on a Wednesday night to TBS Studios? They do the tapings 3 hours on a Wednesday." And he says, "I can't guarantee that you'll get on, but if you want to come with me, fine." So I went a couple of times, and I'll be damned, it was the same old story. Somebody didn't show up. J.J. Dillon comes up and says, "You want to work?" I said, "Sure." So I went in, first match against the Barbarian and the Warlord, and a tag match, and Barbarian speaks, very broken English and that. And threw me in ropes and called Baboo. And I don't know what that was. And I was all full of adrenaline, so I hit the ropes full force, came out and had that size 14 right in my face. Broke my nose, split it open. Everything. Yeah. What he was saying, he threw me in, he was saying big boot, like watch for the big boot. And all I heard was Baboo. I said, "What the hell do you say, Baboo?" Yeah. So anyway, so that's how I got on. That's eventually how I got on to Crockett's and NWA. And then it was okay. And then JJ said, "Well, you come back again?" And I said, "Well, sure." So I started doing TV every week. And they get to know you, and they get to know that, you're an okay guy, I guess. And they said, "Can you do some house shows?" I said, "Well, sure." And they said, "Well, can you travel?" I said, "Sure," because they were doing TV tapings at TBS, but they were also doing it different house shows all over. So that's how that went. And then it was, like I said, it was just a transition into WCW.
It's funny because I listened to the Arn Anderson's podcast, and he goes into detail about the Jim Crockett era and how important it was to have a good enhancement talent to have a match with, because like you said, it's give and take, and it's a sparring partner. And he really put over how important the talent in the enhancement guys are. And when you look at the list of matches that you've been in, enhancement talent is one thing, but they have to trust you to put you in there with the likes of, Ted DiBiase, Akeem, like you mentioned, the Warlord, Rick Rude, Earthquake. Like, there is a who's who of people that
Absolutely
wrestled.
And some of them, I would say 99% of them were, like Arn said, they were very appreciative with what we did. There was a couple that were, stuck on themselves a bit.
Would that be the Ultimate Warrior based on what we've heard? Would that have been the Ultimate Warrior?
No, that would have been at the time, believe it or not, Sting and Lex Luger, most of all.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. The Warrior, he was in his own world. I don't think he was right from day one. But yeah, those two, and then the two that just didn't care, that just hurt people and really did, was Abdullah the Butcher and Vader.
I would have guessed those two, because when you watch a Vader match, he is throwing what they call live rounds, and he doesn't
believe
care.
Me.
Hey, you're on the receiving end of that. When you go, I'm sure Vader has that reputation. When you go into that match with him, are you going there knowing, okay, listen, I'm going to get punched in the face. He's going to potato me, as they say. How do you prepare yourself for that?
You just know you're going to get your ass whooped. That's the bottom line. It. Nobody wanted to work him. And once, I swear, with, Brian Armstrong at the time, Road Dogg, Yep. He was just doing that with his brothers and his dad and that. We were up there. And they come up with a sheet, who you're working, and I was in a tag match with somebody or other, and he was wrestling Vader. So he's upstairs, and he comes down, and he says, Randy, I'm sorry. I said, what are you talking about? They changed the sheet, and now it was me against Vader. So, so that was my thing with him, and we still joke about that. He's down here in the Performance Center, which is about 20 minutes from my house. So, but those punches, like I said, I was in the corner, and he punches you, so you're in the corner getting punched. So I'm sliding down the ropes, down toward the bottom, and then he started punching me up. So he punched me down, and he punched me back up, and then he did a couple of these squashes, and that was a full 400 pounds, and it was on you too. He wasn't breaking it. So, but he didn't care. One guy, he actually, I don't think it was on purpose, but he broke kid's back, kid's paralyzed, and that was a big story, And then of course, some of the other guys, some of the over guys, Paul Orndorff, of course, that was a famous little tussle they had in the locker room one time. And they went to Vader and said, hey, look, you can't take advantage of these kids like that. Pick up somebody your own size. So he was a bully. I guess that's the easiest way for it. At the time, he was a bully. So.
Yeah, and that was a famous story with Paul Orndorff, and I'm pretty sure Orndorff, according to all accounts, got the better of him in that story. He
did. He was an animal, Orndorff, in his day.
Sure. His physique was unearthly back in the WWF days. Now, you spent a lot of time.
Well, a lot of.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh no, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Finish, please.
Well, you're right. There was Orndorff, and prior to that, there wasn't a lot of really built up muscle guys, bodybuilder looking like there is today. And that back then, you had Orndorff, you had Tony Atlas, some guys, and I'm going pre-Warrior and pre-Road Warriors and all that way before. You had big barrel-chested guys, Dick the Bruiser, and even Bruno Sammartino. He had a good build. He was muscle, but he was thick. He looked like a wrestler. Now you got these guys that are, barely 200 pounds, 220 pounds, and they're cut, they're muscular, they're very gymnastic and everything, but it just seems like in a lot of cases it's just kind of lost that luster of looking like a barroom brawler with a cigar hanging out of their mouth, to now they're all pretty boys. Anyways,
that's for sure. And I was going to ask you, somebody with your longevity in the business, you've seen the business change. I mean, from year to, from decade to decade. How would you compare the way it was then to the way? Oh, actually, I should ask you: do you still follow the product as much?
Absolutely. Okay. I was a big fan since I was 4 or 5 years old, and I'm just as big of a fan now.
That's
even
great.
Though I don't agree with the way things has changed, but
you led me to my next question. So now that the business has changed so much since, let's just say, 85 to now, what do you think are the advantages of the change in the business and the disadvantages?
Well, it's funny, the different eras. Like I said, back in the day of Dick the Bruiser, and even Lou Theszin that way back when it was a man's sport and rough and tough, and you got hit with a chair, you got hit with a 2x4, you bled all over the place and drank a lot of beer. That was it. And then Vince started developing the product, and now all of a sudden you've got rock and roll coming in, Cyndi Lauper thing, you got cartoons on television. So now you're getting into a PG area. Well, it was a rough and tumble type wrestling where it was very guarded, like magicians without the internet. Nobody knew what was real or fake. You thought, but you really didn't know. And you couldn't just get in the business. You really had to know somebody. And then all of a sudden we got comic books and we got TV shows, comic for the kids and everything else. It changed, Then that died out. And now you've got a new generation of acrobats. Gymnasts. Today, what is a common move? Anything off the top rope, a crossbody, anything like that. Back in the day, that was a finishing move, period. A DDT, now they call it a dozen different names, but basically DDT was a finishing maneuver. Now everybody's doing that. There are none. Back in the old days, they told stories. There was a story. There was a build-up. First of all, you didn't see the world champion every couple of weeks or anything else. You might see him 2 or 3 or 4 times a year come into your town. It was really something. Now it seems like a lot of the titles in that have been very homogenized. You've got the Intercontinental, which used to be a pretty big thing, WWE, and then now it's really not much of nothing. You got this 24/7 title. I don't know what the hell that's all about. Okay. But
nobody does. It's not
from
just
an old guy
looking back.
But from an old guy looking back at what wrestling was and what it is, and this is just my preference. I liked the storylines where there was a build in this town, and that story went to the next town and to the next town, and then they had a big main event somewhere at the Omni or something like that. There was no pay-per-views at the time. But these big feuds finally ended. You don't have that. You don't have that building soap opera storyline anymore. Now you got titles changing hands right and left. I think they're probably trying to do with Brock Lesnar with not making as many appearances. That's kind of a throwback to what it used to be. Now everybody wants to see him. But, how many matches are you going to see Roman Reigns and Baron Corbin? There's no build. There's no story to it. It's just a match after match, and you watch it on Raw or you watch it on SmackDown. And then, they used to have $50 pay-per-views, and now for $9.95 you get a free pay-per-view for 3 months or whatever it is. And it's just, I don't know, it's just lost its luster from what professional wrestling started at and what it is. And it's developing more and more that way. Now, where it's going to happen next, I don't really know. You've got these groups. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Have you been able to catch the new NWA show that's available on YouTube?
Yes.
I'm so curious to hear your take on that, because that is my favorite professional wrestling program to watch week to week. Joe and I speak about it all the time. I still go back and watch the NWA from the early, mid to late 80s, and I feel like the NWA Power Show is just the best 1 hour of wrestling every single week. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I totally agree, because they have a little bit of today's stuff, but they're also trying to bring wrestling to what people think wrestling should be. You know, it's not a little. Adults used to watch the wrestling. They're the ones that had the money for the tickets, for the pay-per-views, for everything else. Now to go to get a match, some of these, $500, $600, $1,000 for